first and foremost, you need to be building audience, because if you don't have an audience, then you got nothing to offer your potential sponsors and advertisers. So audience first and then monetization.
That was Kerry Lutz, and this is Podcast Ninja.
Podcast Ninja.
What's going on, ninjas? I'm your host, Anthony, and this is Podcast Ninja, a show that interviews the most successful podcasters in the game. And my goal is simply to uncover the best podcasting strategies that you can apply to your show. In today's episode, we have Kerry Lutz, who is the host of the Financial Survival Network and Viral Podcasting. He also teamed up with Valerie Geller, who's a top radio consultant, to write Viral Podcasting. Now, if you want to learn how to grow your audience and possibly earn an income from your show, this is going to be the perfect episode for you. Let's get into the show. Welcome to the show, Kerry. I'm happy to have you on. How you doing?
All right. Hey, thanks for having me, and I'm honored.
I want to kick it off first to those who don't know about your podcast. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about, what's it called and what's your podcast all about?
Sure. Well, my main podcast is financialsurvivalnetwork.com, and that's a financially oriented podcast, which I've been doing. I'm on my 7th year now. The one that we're concerned about is viral podcasting. I wrote a book, Viral Podcasting, How to Earn a Six-Figure Income from Your Show. And basically it's somewhat autobiographical, doing podcasting for 4 years and really not making a cent, and then kind of unraveling the Rosetta Stone, if you will, on how to turn your podcast into an income generator, and a good one at that.
So, Financial Survival Network, that was the first podcast you ever put out, right?
Yeah. I started that in 2011. It's gotten, tens of millions of downloads since then, not including all the YouTube downloads. And, from that, other people started coming to me, and, because I'm getting tens of thousands of people listening from around the world, every day, some days. And people wanted to know, well, how do I do it? How can I get successful at this? And that kind of launched the other part of the career of viral podcasting.
Yeah, I mean, well, you've shown, great examples of that show, and you've done well, so people are definitely going to come to you. And, you have a lot of expertise too, right? I mean, you sort of were in the radio space a bit before that, right?
Yeah, well, I had done kind of a little bit before I started the podcast. I started doing a radio show on fixing your credit and real estate, things I wasn't really that into. I'd been an attorney for many years, so I was an expert in those kind of areas, but it wasn't where my passion was at. But from there, going on radio, realizing, hey, I've got a recording of the show, I should put it up on iTunes and see what happens. And as it turned out, not much happened. Basically, I was getting 20 to 50 downloads per show, and that was probably people that knew me and family and who knows who else, people that accidentally discovered it.
So you never had like any real branding or like website around that show to start? Like you weren't really present on social media or anything like that?
Oh, back then, social media wasn't the force that it is now. And I was just starting out. I was more concerned about perfecting the tools of communication than I was about becoming an overnight hit, which, believe me, those shows were so bad the first 20 or 30 that it's better that you passed over them than listened to them.
Jeez, I know so many people say that over the, when you first start, a lot of podcasters are embarrassed of their first couple episodes, but now you've kind of developed it over years, and now you're doing thousands and thousands of downloads, right, per, and now you're over you're almost at 4,000 episodes, right?
Well, it's actually more than that, but, one of the things I learned is, you really want to stick with one podcast server if you can. I think we're closer to 5,000 in that time. when I first started out, I was working, my concept was I'm going into this alternative investing space, freedom, libertarian. I'm going to be a New Yorker. I'm going to work harder at it, do more shows than anyone else. And I succeeded in that. And I did it more from the standpoint to get good at this stuff. You got to keep doing it. You can't do a once a week podcast with no media background and think that you are just going to kill it and learn everything that you need to know, because it's just not going to happen.
Yeah. So then I guess, maybe you could kind of open up a little bit and share how so you're getting, 20, 30, 40, 50. I mean, 50% of the people listening right now are maybe only getting 200 downloads per episode. And I guess, where's that start? Like, when did you see a lift? What did you start doing that kind of started cracking that 100 mark, so to speak,
Well, I decided I didn't want to talk about credit and buying real estate, buying a home, because I felt like a lot of the people I was helping to fix their credit were just going to get in the same jam again. So I said, I'm going to switch to, or at least I'll try interviewing people that I'm interested in. And I had been listening to some other podcasts that were, similar subject matter. So I invited a few of those guys onto the show, interviewed them, and found that, hey, this is a lot easier when you really love what you're doing, when the passion's there. And then I said, well, I'm using GarageBand, and I had a Snowball blue mic, and I said, I got to really learn how to do this podcast thing, because I don't know what I'm doing here. I kind of figured out you need a podcast server. Okay. I went to this one that will go nameless that really didn't have great service, but it was cheap. And I started posting them there. And then all of a sudden, the downloads, I was getting 3 to 10,000 downloads a month. This is in the summer of 2011. And I said, well, who the heck knows how to do these podcasts? I listened to a number of them. Some of them had better production values than others. I said, if I'm going to do this, I've got to have really good production values. I'm going to be a professional at this, a professional internet broadcaster. And I did a Google search, and there was Cliff Ravenscraft, Podcasting A to Z. At the time, the course was $1,000. I think it's substantially higher now. I instantly signed up, and in July of 2011, I think it was a 4-week course, there was a bunch of other people on there with me who were also well-known now, who've really upped their game. But doing what Cliff said, I immediately increased my downloads. I think I was getting 50,000 downloads a month at that point. And Cliff said something that really stuck in my mind. He said, if you have good production values, it's not going to get people to listen to your show. However, it will get them to come back again and again. And that, is in my book, Viral Podcasting, along with a lot of other common sense ways of doing it. But I would have to say that from when I'd made the decision to go full-time, full tilt at this thing, what really made the difference was a plan. Now, my plan, Mike Tyson says, a plan is great until you get in the ring and you get hit in the head. And my plan, my monetization scheme was, hey, I'm going to do really good interviews of mining company executives, resource companies, and, because I've got such a good audience, they're going to want to pay me, and I'm going to make money this way. And I had other income at the time. It wasn't my primary thing, but what happened was within 6 months, the price of gold, silver had collapsed. These mining companies had no budget for investor outreach, and that was the end of that concept. So as a result, not a lot of opportunities. I had to look for other advertising opportunities, and the audience continued to build and continues to build to this day. A lot of it's cyclical. A lot of it's related to world events outside my control, market events. But eventually, the volume goes up and the number of people listening goes up. And that, I feel, is more, it's one of the keys that I talk about in the book of why people listen to you.
Yeah. I'm curious, maybe back then, no Facebook ads, but did you ever get into like Google AdWords or anything, or?
Nope, never did it. Wow. I just did straight link sharing. I get, I would be very discriminating about the guest. Doesn't mean I would say if you don't have, if you don't have 100,000 followers or views a day on your website, I'm not interested in you. But I would look for guys that had big followings and who weren't doing a podcast necessarily, and then do the interview, shoot them off the link. They would post it on their site. Their audience became my audience. Mine became theirs. And the cost of doing that was zero. Now, I wouldn't just do a fluffy, softball interview. I would look, this is one of the other keys, is if you ever read any books by Michael Connolly, Harry Bosch, he's the probably leading detective story writer in the country now, or in the world. Before that, he was a crime reporter in Fort Lauderdale, Florida for the Sun Sentinel. And he's talking about his career there before he got famous. And he would be going out, and he talked, there was a murder that took place, and the detective was there. And he sees the detective take his glasses and put the temple in his mouth, and he's chewing on it. And then he looks and he sees there's a ridge on that temple because that guy does this. And that was the angle of his story. And doing an interview of, the basics of somebody that's interviewed all the time isn't going to cut it. You've got to find the angle in every story. That's what a real journalist does. When the days before they just made up news out of whole cloth, they actually reported stories, and everything is a story, and you need to find the angle on the story that is going to resonate, and people are going to say, gee, wow, I didn't know that. That's really interesting. So, like mining company executives, people interview them. What's the ore grade? What's the infrastructure like? And all this. Well, that's all stuff that you can find on the company's website if you bother going there. But if you're not interested in the CEO and his story, then you're not going to go to the website. So it's up to me to portray these guys differently than they've ever been portrayed before. Get some of the hard information in there. It can't just be fluff, but explain to you like who this person is and why you might think of investing your hard-earned dollars in his company. And a friend of mine who's a big media guy now, Wayne Allen Root, he stated it really simple. Facts tell, stories sell. So we want stories. And as a podcaster, whether you're doing a nonfiction podcast, interview-based, or fiction, it's all about the story.
And yeah, I guess it's easier said than done. I mean, did it used to take a long time for you to sort of, or still do, to find that angle that no one else has? Like, I know people that listen to like every single, podcast episode or blog post that one guy has written, and it takes a long time to do that research, I suppose.
I'm somewhat of I wouldn't call myself an expert in mining companies, but I'm an expert in people. And, I look at the company's website, and then, I just try to cut through the fluff and, all right, who's this guy? Why should you trust him? And it could be like, I'll ask somebody, what do you do when you're not working in those rare moments? And, they might be into fishing. And so I'll start the podcast off saying, mining is a lot like fishing. You go to a place where you hope there's a lot of fish, and you cast your line, and you hope that you're going to catch something big. And that's what miners do. And then we'll kind of tie it in there. I can't teach people how to do this. You have to be able to think. And the worst ones are scripted interviews, in my opinion. I've done a couple, hate them, having those 10 questions lined up, one after the other. You're not really going to know. You're not going to find out anything interesting about that person that they don't want you to know. I remember watching Bill O'Reilly. Definitely didn't like the guy, but he would hit him with a question to throw them off their balance, knock down their guard, and then go for it. I don't feel like I need an adversarial relationship with someone I'm interviewing. I just want to show another side of who they are. And Like so many times people said, "Oh, that's the best interview I've ever done. Thank you." And it's just a technique that any one of you can master if you keep doing it and practicing it. And hey, also, I had a radio coach, and there's no substitute for that either. She's a contributor in the book Viral Podcasting, Valerie Geller, probably one of the top consultants in the world. Spends, all over, goes all over the world, teaching people how to do radio and now podcasting. So a lot of the techniques I learned from her as well. But you have to make an investment and treat it as a profession. If you're treating it as a hobby, it's going to stay a hobby.
Yeah. I think you made a good point there too, is because a lot of people with your confidence and your skill level, they didn't start yesterday or even 2-3 years ago. You know what I mean? The consistency that you put out, I mean, I've checked out your whole site and everything, and you put out content constantly. I know you have a newsletter that you always post if you're not doing a podcast. Can you maybe talk a little bit about the content and how consistent you are? You're putting out content all the time.
I should be more consistent with a newsletter, I confess. But a newsletter is a very basic traffic building tool for any website. I've got 10,000 plus email addresses that I've acquired during this time. They probably should be getting more people, but you can't do everything. But 10,000's pretty good. You can make money off of that. And then every time I send the newsletter out, 500, 1,000 people come to the site who might not have otherwise come. So the newsletter is crucial for anybody starting a podcast. And sometimes I write my own content, but sometimes I don't. It takes, for me as a writer, I really find that I really have to concentrate, and I'm kind of a perfectionist when it comes to my writing. So I have to, spend a lot of time on it, but lots of times I'll just put together the last 10 podcasts and a bunch of news that we've aggregated for the day. And that's fine. So, but newsletter, definitely one of the tools that you need to use, which means you need an email capture tool, a tool to get your viewers, your listeners' email addresses. Podcasting, that's one of the downfalls of podcasting, is that you never know who your listeners are. They're totally anonymized by most platforms out there. And then which means you have to make a separate outreach to get email addresses, and you're only going to get a few % of the number of people that actually stop by your site on an ongoing basis. It's just the way it is. So you do freebies, giveaways, blah, blah, blah. Those tools are pretty standardized. You have pop-up boxes. You use opt-in monster. I think that's the best one out there to get people to opt in. A lot of different ways of doing it. They're all boiled down to pretty much the same thing. And, then you make these people part of a community. What I'm trying to do now is put together a user forum on the site so people can talk, because a lot of people, are interested in interacting with other listeners and other members of the community.
Yeah. And I'm actually, I just clicked on your site right now as we're talking, and, cause I saw I think you have a couple different email captures, right? You have like Amazon secrets, and there's a 10 commandments of successful investing.
Those are advertisers.
Oh, there's the advertisers. I thought they were email collectors. I'm sorry. Okay.
No,
so that's the financial, survival toolkit. There you go. Okay.
Yep. There it is. And, I could do better. The next redesign of the site, I will definitely do better on it for sure. But, this is the thing. Everything it's a journey. You're evolving, you're learning, and you got to be open to be learning, because that's all we have when you get down to it. There's no other way to do this thing but to keep broadening your knowledge base, keep learning more and more, and it will pay off over time.
So I guess then the question is, how long? You know what I mean? Like, say if someone has a couple thousand downloads, like, when do they get that green light to kind of say, you know what, man, I think it's time I start monetizing, or I think I should earn money? Like, what's that first step to kind of trigger that?
we kind of talk about that in the book. And the first thing you have to look at is, what is your business model? How are you going to make money? All right. So business models are, I've got a business already. I'm a consultant or brick and mortar or whatever, and I'm going to use the podcast to bring more customers. Well, then you're going to be monetizing from day one. Number two is you could be a spokesman. If you're a paddleboarder and you're a champion paddleboarder, then you might very well get paddleboard manufacturers to sponsor your show. Just one example, but fill in the blank. Could be skis, could be anything. You might be a minor celebrity at the present time. You might be an influencer, and in which case, again, you should be able to find spokesman opportunities. And that is like the best, because you're making money no matter what happens. And then there's what I've done, which is advertiser sponsored, which I basically urge everybody not to do. It's the hardest model to fulfill, to become effectively a radio station. Probably if I was starting out today, I would not do it. The most successful people I know in this business, a guy like Jason Hartman, jasonhartman.com, real estate guy, he was just started producing his podcast 12 years ago, and he's made millions from it, but nobody knows about him. But basically, it's just talking about real estate, but talking about world affairs and talking about investing, talking about the markets, all of this. And, you know, he's made a fortune from it. And that's the only advertising I believe he's ever done for his company. So when you have the existing company, it's real easy to make your podcast an add-on. And it also lowers your risk dramatically, because what's the worst that can happen is you're not going to make any more customers. Yeah. You know, nowhere's off other than the time invested in the minor production costs involved in podcasting. So he really is one of the biggest success stories out there. And he's been, a mentor to me, and really shows how it can be done. So my model, the advertising supported model, really is a tough one, because the people who are advertising with you want results. They want to see that you are who you say you are, that you're going to bring results to them. And when you're starting out, it's not always easy to do. Another place where I make money is I just have it hosted on Blog Talk Radio, and they serve up ads, and the ads, generate revenue every month, pretty much passive income. And it's really grown very nicely into the, thousands of dollars per month. And really, the audience understands that you need to make money to keep doing your show. So they're more sympathetic to your ads than you would be in the radio. You're going around, you're driving in your car, commercial comes on, boom, hit button. Another commercial comes on, hit button. And you're avoiding the commercials. Here, they've made the conscious decision to listen to you. So, maybe they'll scroll through an ad if they're really bored, but usually they'll be very tolerant of it. And that's why podcasting is so good, because it's so personal, and you make a connection with your audience that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do necessarily on radio or other mass media.
So your show, you have an ad that rolls through. I'll be honest, man. I skipped through the pre-roll. I don't know if I don't think you have a mid-roll for your show, but
some of them.
Some episodes. Okay. So should people expect a lot of money for advertisements? Do you have an estimated pricing basics, per 1,000 downloads or something? What is the average?
If you could get $3 to $5 per 1,000. Sometimes they have longer downloads, longer messages, $3 to $5 per 1,000. So that's why until you get into the major downloads, it's not going to be meaningful money at all. But it will add up over time. And if you're building audience, my model was build audience first. Okay, first and foremost, you need to be building audience, because if you don't have an audience, then you got nothing to offer your potential sponsors and advertisers. So audience first and then monetization. That was my plan. But you don't always have that option available to you. Sometimes you need money right away, or which comes back to the way to do this thing. The proper way is treat it like a business from the beginning. Rob Walsh over at Libsyn says, treat your podcast like a business. And if you do that, then you've got a good shot at actually making this thing work. But till you do that, it's not going to work to just try to go monetize right away before you know what you have to offer. It's just not going to happen.
I see you also have some like Amazon affiliate links. Does that actually do well? I feel like in general it hasn't done podcasters very well.
Yeah, that stuff is of marginal value.
Sure.
Sometimes it works, sometimes not. It all kind of varies. I can't say, sometimes they'll be real good, other times, it's like Google AdWords.
Yeah.
Google AdWords, Google's only purpose in life is to make money off of your content. They don't care if you are, making money or any of that stuff. All they care about is how they can soak you to make money. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I hate to say it, but it's really the truth. So you're not going to do real well. And they keep cutting it back. I mean, I used to know people who made tens of thousands of dollars a month on their AdWords, AdSense, and now they make hundreds. And it's not because there's less advertising on Google. So you figure out why they're not making the money they once were, because somebody is.
So I guess, I'm gonna guess your resources page, but what's your biggest driver? Is it, because I know you have a ton of resources I see listed, like 20 through, can you explain a little bit like what the resource page is and how that could benefit a podcaster?
Just, those are people who've got me on their resource pages. I haven't really updated it much lately. It's a tool. It's not going to make you, it's not going to break you, but it could be very helpful in getting other people to mention your show. And, you're much better off doing it than not doing it. So, it's like, look, this thing is a strategy. This is why you need to plan out to do a business plan. It's not like you're doing a business plan to raise capital where you're going to need, millions of dollars and all that. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about a business plan where you figure out what's my break-even point every month? How much do I need to pay the nut here? What am I looking to do? Right? What are your goals and why are you doing it? All these things are things that you need to consider, in my opinion, before you even record your first episode. Who is your market? All these things. Because if you don't figure out your why and who your audience is going to be, you're never going to be really able to reach that audience, except fortuitously. And you might not get an audience because you don't really know what you're doing. So all of this is focus. It's all about goal setting, but it's not just making a wish list, if you will. It's really about really figuring out what you're doing and why you're doing it and how you're going to do things. Like I said, the plan itself probably not going to work out, but you're always better off having a plan than not. I mean, I always liken it to, you go to a movie theater and you look around at the exits. All right. So nothing's going to happen, but if something does happen, you're going to be prepared for it. And so know where the exits are. And that's all we can do here is attempt to predict, to see what's going to happen down the road and then act accordingly. But you're much better off having a plan than not, especially in this day and age, because look, there's so many podcasts out there, and how are you going to stand out? How are you going to be number one or on the top 5 in your segment. And without the plan, you're not going to do it. It's almost ensured that you won't. I mean, it's just so hard to actually make this thing work. That's why people hire me, because, you know, they've tried it on their own and they can't do it, and they can't build an audience, and they don't know what they're doing, basically. And, you know, there's nothing, everybody needs help. You know, everybody requires, some guidance, Anthony. None of this is natural. You aren't born a podcaster or a radio personality. The thing is that so many people believe, they hear somebody talking on the radio, oh, he's just talking. I can talk. I can do it. And you might be able to do it, but you're not going to do it just talking in your regular conversational tone that you would with your spouse or your kids. It's not to say you shouldn't be real. You certainly should, but the fact is there's techniques out there that make you an effective communicator and an effective podcaster, and you need to master them if you're going to be serious about this stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because you yourself and your podcast, it's unique, because if you look at like a lot of other investment platforms or financial freedom or financial advisors, I'm not saying you're a financial advisor, but you know, a lot of them are maybe selling like newsletter memberships or like software, you know, and so, you know, I don't want to call you like a commentator, but you're not giving investment advice, are you? I mean, I don't know, are you?
I don't do advice. I always people, if you listen to any financial advice I give you, you're guaranteed you're going to lose money. And, you know, it's a joke, but somewhat serious too.
Well, I guess because I've had a lot of people ask, as a person that isn't selling investment advice or doesn't have a software, what is your biggest driver of income on your whole platform?
Sponsorships now. Like
Sponsorships,
these mining companies have come back. They pay me to do interviews, blog talk. You know, one of the things I talk about in the book, Viral Podcasting, is the wealthy have figured this out a long time ago, but the average working stiff is kind of just figuring this out. And that is the concept of multiple income streams. Maybe your website will only bring in $500 a month in advertising, but then maybe you can pick up another 1,000 from Blog Talk, and then you run a special event because you've got such a good audience, and you make a couple thousand there. All of a sudden, Anthony, these multiple streams of income start adding up, and you're making some pretty decent money. You know, one of the things I started doing recently is webinars, where I will have a company that sponsors it, and I'll have another speaker who's got a good audience, good size audience, who I've interviewed a number of times. And then I'll be talking about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, which are all the rage. He'll be talking about gold. And then we'll have this round table at the end. And that's turned out to be highly profitable for me. You know, you have to think outside the box. You've got to think, well, what is it that your potential sponsor, advertiser wants? What is it that they're looking for that they can't get elsewhere? And, you know, with a webinar, it's like, hey, they get to up their mailing list, increase the size of their mailing list. They get, like, what these companies need to do now is community building. And a webinar is the best thing for community building. So that's just one example. So and look, they keep coming up, like consulting clients. You know, I wasn't looking for consulting clients. I didn't know anything about it. And they just started coming to me because they wanted to put stuff on my page because they knew it would draw traffic to theirs. And I can take somebody's podcast who's getting like 100 downloads per episode and bring them up to 10, 15,000 instantly. All right. Doesn't mean they're going to keep them, because if you're no good, you're no good. Your downloads will go down over time, but I can do that really quickly. That's why I created Viral Podcasting. So that opportunity just sprang out of nowhere. It was somebody's idea. I co-host podcasts because, look, your podcast could be great, informational, but if it's boring, people aren't going to listen to you. So what we do is I co-host it. It's got to be a topic that I'm somewhat interested in. I'm not just going to sit there, because it's a lot harder to co-host a show than it is to host your own show. Trust me on that. Yeah. But, you know, you make it interesting for the person, you spice it up, add a little controversy, some jokes, and, that's how you build audience. Look, I started saying before, in this business, whether you're the most hardcore deadpan newscaster on CNN or NBC, or you're a commentator, whatever, you're in the entertainment business, okay? You are entertaining people. That doesn't mean that it's song and dance and all that, but people listen to you more, almost as much for your content as they do for your personality, because they get to know you, they make a connection, and then before you know it, you're part of their life. So how do you do that? How do you build these connections? And that's something that it's real difficult to learn on your own. It takes probably a few hundred shows. Most of you will have given up your podcast before you get to that point, but persistence and keep learning. Like I still have one of the things that no podcaster does that I am adamant about is air checks. What's an air check? That's where you sit down with somebody and you listen to a show, and the person has to be knowledgeable, and they tell you what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong, with the intention of giving you constructive criticism and improving the quality and content of your show. It's really that simple. But podcasters, you talk to them, if 1 out of 100 do it, Anthony, I would be shocked. In fact, I haven't met anybody else besides me who's a podcaster that does, well, one other person, and that's in the hundreds of guests that I've had on the show who are, a lot of them are podcasters. We're too busy going forward. We can't look back. Well, that's a major mistake in your podcasting career and business.
I kind of want to wrap up the episode at this point, and I think because you're getting a lot of content to digest for people to go back and readjust, and I think one of the biggest concerns people have is the fact that they lose money with production and hosting and time. So I guess, what advice would you give someone that's losing money on their show, maybe why, and just, any other tips you could give on just how they can continue to earn and be profitable?
Well, concentrate on the things that you do the best. I made this decision from the get-go. Well, I'd say it was 6 months later that I had to have a producer because A, I'm a lousy scheduling guests, and B, I know how to use Audition. I'm probably a C+, B- as far as editing my shows and quality and all that, but it's time consuming and I want somebody else to listen to it, to pick up mistakes and make the edits necessary. So I hired a producer. So if you can't do that, then I'd say you probably got to go somebody like you. If you're only doing one show a week, you're not hiring a producer. It just ain't going to happen. So you go with a professional production company like yours, and then you have to have a budget, and you've got to figure out how much of a loss you're willing to take. Obviously, if you're promoting another business that you're already in, then it becomes a loss leader and will probably bring you clients. And if it's not, you need to look at what you're doing and figure out why you're missing the mark. So that's what it really comes down to, hobby or professional. If you're going to be a professional, then you need to do everything you can, make changes, learn, admit your weaknesses, acknowledge your strengths, and have the plan that's going to lead you to success. And if you're not willing to do that, then there's lots of other things you could do on the internet that are a lot easier. But I've known people who've really made millions of dollars from their shows, and honestly, their shows weren't that good, but they were good enough. And if you want to be just good enough, it's probably not going to work now. You need to be great. You need to be excellent. You need to be striving for it. Your audiences will put up with your mistakes, your errors, and your deficiencies. But what they won't put up with is you being a slacker, you being lazy. So you really need to make a major commitment to doing this, or don't bother.
Well said, Kerry, man. I appreciate everything. I think that's great content you're putting out there. Say if someone wants a little more insight, I mean, I know you have a ton more secrets, in your book, Viral Podcasting, and I'm sure there's a lot more. How can someone reach out if they kind of want to dive a little more deeper into this conversation?
Yeah, well, first, definitely get the book. I mean, it's $20 and it really will help you. It's the only book of its kind out there that really tells you how to make this thing a business. and not just a hobby or a money loser. So that you can get that on Amazon, either Kindle, whatever. It's $10 on Kindle, whatever you want to do. And then you can always email me, kl@kerrylutz.com, kl@kerrylutz.com. And, tell me what you're doing. And look, if it's something that's interesting that I feel I can help you with, then I'll go all in with you. But it's got to be a subject that I'm personally interested in before I really consult on it or co-host or any of that. But I can just promote your show if it's appropriate for my site. You could be getting 10, 20,000 downloads per episode tomorrow, literally.
Cool. All right, Kerry. Thanks a lot, man. Thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time out today.
Hey, and I appreciate you having me on, Anthony. And hey, love what you're doing. You're doing great work and really helping people to realize their podcasting dreams, and that's our business.
Thank you for listening to the 7th episode of Podcast Ninja. If you want to check out any of Kerry's podcasts, or maybe you want to buy his book, or you want to look into the 5 or so influencers he mentioned during the show, you could go to podcastninja.net/7. And if you want to hire a podcast ninja to help you manage, record, edit, publish your show, you could go to podcastninja.net. And thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you in the next episode.
Podcast Ninja.